Hey everyone, welcome to Wednesday. This is November 20th, my goodness, and this is the weekly briefing. I'm excited about this topic. But before I jump into it, I probably should make more formal announcement that next week on Wednesday is the day before Thanksgiving here in the States. So we will not be doing the weekly briefing on next Wednesday. And as well as if you're wondering, I'm not doing it on Christmas or New Year's Day also. So those 3 days of the next 6 or 7 weeks that's left, we're not going to be doing any weekly briefings on the holiday. So we'll keep you posted on that. I'll let you know as well. But before we get started, hey Matt, hey Joe, how are you guys doing today?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Doing
Doing
good,
okay.
doing good.
This is great. I kind of wanted this topic was inspired a little bit from a conversation I was having with a client. I guess it was 2 days ago, and we got into one of those stories where like there was an obvious mistake of like serving Coke to a Pepsi client or wearing Adidas at a Nike gathering kind of a thing. In this one, it was someone doing outreach for a company, and it was either a thank you gift or Christmas gift or something like that, or outreach gift. They went and bought a bunch of Starbucks cards, but they sent it directly to one of their clients who's in the coffee business, and it's not Starbucks. So it was a very offensive act to send it to them. And you can imagine going up the food chain where, it's probably just a basic mistake. Obviously, it was genuine in nature, trying to just do something nice, but a little bit tone deaf that the conversation took place. And then that brand pulled away from that agency. And I thought, wow, that's such a simple thing that takes place. But it got me thinking more of like, wow, there's probably some real big items that make people lose their clients that if we're not on top of it, it can be somewhat painful. And to me, onboarding is one that we probably lose clients more often than not right there at the very beginning. I think that the onboarding process, who's doing your outreach, the conversations you're having, who's guiding that first conversation can be a big hit from the very beginning. So that's where I go. Like, I bet you there's 3 layers. And as we talked more, there are kind of 3 layers to this. So let's just jump into it. Let's kind of recognize, like, Joe, you came from an agency background, so you probably have more stories or not of working with production companies that you worked with over years and had some resistance or issues or said, I'm never going to work with them again. So to have your point of view be great. But Matt, also being a business owner and later a consultant, I know that you have wrapped your mind around this many times.
You go first, Joe. What's that agency truth?
It's that you can tell right off the bat who has an onboarding SOP and who doesn't. Every sales conversation sounds like it's going to be the best fit partnership in the world. But when I need a thing in week one and you didn't expect to give it to me until week three, we're immediately at a place where we're behind the 8 ball. And so you can just kind of smell the lack of an SOP. And I think small agencies say things like, or small studios say things like, we don't need that. We're hands-on leadership's on the calls. We're going to get it figured out. But everybody's too busy all the time, and so you can tell kind of when they don't have it all the way buttoned up.
Mm. It's really hard if you've like, it's so easy to put off a risk-averse person. Like you can just say the wrong thing. Like it's just like little, their love languages. And if you can get that right at the beginning, it smooths things out so much. And certainly, Tim, your story, when people are thinking about Christmas presents, trying not to be tone deaf and sending the wrong coffee voucher to the wrong person is pretty important right now.
Yeah. It's interesting that the recognizing that you're putting your best foot forward from the very beginning is very important. I think that there's maybe so many no's, so much resistance to sales, so much, I don't know, sense of failure or fear of failure that maybe we give up sooner than later. But to Joe's point, to recognize that, to have an operating procedure for sales, to know exactly what you want someone to do along the lines, but even just simply the onboarding call. I keep hearing horror story after horror story of people that jump onto an onboarding call. They don't ask the right questions. The client might or might not have known those answers anyway, but did not use that onboarding call for onboarding. introduce the right people, have creative directors not show up to those, all of a sudden that client is thinking, obviously I'm not important to you, or you're not buttoned up, or you're too amateur, and the risk of working with you, not worth it. I'm going to move on. So this is like being fired before you're ever hired, but clearly for someone to recognize, like, I'm not going to work with you if you can't get your act together, is a really big issue in growing your business.
And I think there's pressure right around the time the client's about to sign, or right around the time that they have, where there has been so much effort, whether it's pitching creative, chemistry checks, all of these things, going through procurement, whatever that is. So much effort put into the win that you feel like when you're there, you just want to relax and you just want to be like, okay, great, we're through the thing, right? Let's all be friends and get something done. When you're on the client side, okay, we've been through the win, right? You got the thing. Now I need you to make things happen for me. And I find that that's often the miss. It's like, I'm ready to take a deep breath and celebrate versus I'm ready for you to essentially quadruple down on your effort and get to work. That's where sometimes I find expectations aren't aligned.
Yeah, one of the things I like to tell producers is your job is to manage the client's expectations. And to understand expectations is very tricky. If you don't have it outlined or detailed, or make it really clear from the beginning what's possible or not possible, then you might be misaligned and kind of working against a promise that you've quietly made or didn't understand you made. And not meeting those promises is really one of the first big issues we have. Is like failure to meet promises. No problem. We're going to find another person to work with that can be true to the word or true to the process.
How many people have an onboarding process on this call?
Yeah, Dallas.
Dallas does.
Yeah. Even to just want to do an
onboarding
process, right? Yeah. I'm going to say the scale. Go ahead, Dallas.
I'm sorry, I didn't know if that was a call to talk or not. Are we talking about a client onboarding process?
Yeah.
I apologize. I'm kind of double dipping here. I'm reviewing and then popping in over here. So we have an onboarding. I apologize. I got here late, so it might be all wrong. But I recently took my podcast partnerships person and put him on De Facto Sound. So we have this onboarding process where he or our project manager does the first vetting process just to save my own time. They really are gleaning. The goal here is to get the client talking 95% of the time, because when somebody is speaking, that when they're speaking all the time, they trust you more because you hear them and they get all of it out. It's like counseling when you're in therapy and you're talking 95% of the time and you walk away and you go, oh my goodness, that went so well. So we get them talking. And really just, we're trying to glean every single little bit of information that we can possibly get. Like, what pool are they swimming in? Like, we're vetting, can we help them? Can we help them in this, that, and the other? It's like being a doctor. You can't prescribe unless you know what the problem is. And then that kind of weeds a lot of people down, saves me a lot of time. And then eventually, went through the vetting process. Once there's an actual project, I come in, I never do initial things, because I just don't think anyone should have access to the owner and the high-end creative right off the bat. I think it's good to have a process, to have that reveal of, okay, now you're working with the creative. Even though I am the puppet master behind the scenes, I never talk money. And then eventually we talk all creative all the time. And then I then behind the scenes talk to my project manager. Here's how much I could cost, how much it should cost. Plus, if we have any commissions we need to pay out or whatnot. And so it's a slow roll process. That's basically how we do it.
Yeah. You can even see just the fact that you have it thought out makes it so much easier to create expectations, meet those expectations from the very beginning. And to some degree, there's an opportunity to step in as the expert. Hey, if the client doesn't yet know what their full budget's going to be, or doesn't have a creative brief, that's a moment you could step in and say, well, we actually need a creative. Help us. We'll put it together for you. It shows you're a step up in expertise. It doesn't have to always be an upsell. It shows an up value proposition to be there. I love the idea that you keep yourself out of the loop a little bit and designate who you are specifically to the client from the very beginning. That's a smart.
I also take a strong stance on information is free, implementation costs money. So basically, I'll even if I'm in a meeting with someone through that process, I'm really digging into here's how you can edit better for this specific thing. Here's what I think you're trying to say. Here's the frame shifts that you may be able to do. And I geek on that and I don't get paid for it, and that's fine, but it builds trust. And so
Very smart.
Yeah. I just try to save my own time just by kind of letting other people vet because they're really smart.
Well,
Yeah,
I
I worked
appreciate
with a
that.
studio where they describe it as a double date, where the producers have to like get along and the creators have to get along, and everyone has to kind of learn to respect each other's process on day one, so that you can hopefully have a second date.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Dallas. That's great. You can see where like that's like the antidote for like the first kind of issue of like being fired, you ever get hired, but just from the very beginning, the onboarding process would be one of the first failures you can put in place. Not really get there. Let's talk about meeting clients' expectations, right? Because we kind of hinted on that a little bit too, of like from the very beginning and making promises. The second biggest place I see people get nailed all the time is literally not delivering, right? So they have set something up from the very beginning. They've made certain promises, the scope of work that they put into place and agreed upon, and then you're getting through the project and you actually can't deliver. Sometimes the delivery can be, the client's expectations have changed and you didn't step up to clarify something, make something very, to put some understanding of what the scope is and readjust either time, budget, or other people's deliverables. And other times it could be totally a technical problem or in-house misunderstanding. But when you're not hitting that mark and you made a promise and you didn't keep it, clearly you're out the door, right?
I think not delivering as often comes down to unspoken expectations as it does to set or scoped expectations. So we committed to a thing that we can't deliver on time or on budget is obviously a big one. But Dallas, you even referenced it, right? There's an unspoken kind of like assumption that if the principal is doing the pitching, the principal is going to be there carrying your project and all the context you shared with them over the finish line. And I know from a principal's perspective, I'm like, I got this thing signed. I got to pass it off and I got to go do it again. And then right off the bat, there is a missed unspoken expectation that me and my expertise were going to carry the project through to completion. And you're fired on month one of a 6-month contract, right? Or deliverable one of a 10 deliverable set if client doesn't see the person they want to see.
Yeah, right. So there are many times where you're putting the creative team or the creative aspects forward, maybe even put yourself forward, and you knew right away that you're passing that on and not made the introduction, given that new person, the bait and switch, right? Not made the introduction, make it very clear who's going to work, how you're going to work with them, and then let that new leader step in. If you need to be part of the process and you're made that commitment, you have to step up and keep on making that commitment. There's obviously a lot of legitimate reasons why you shouldn't be on every single call, every single step. That's what delegating is about. That's what micromanaging, like no one wants you to micromanage the expectations, but clearly like that one of a bait and switch does come back to bite you pretty bad.
When I can say I hate the bait and switch so badly. If I've established even a modicum of trust, it's so frustrating to feel like it's not just that it's a whole different person, it's that that trust has been broken. And also I was guilty of the bait and switch a million times when I ran my agency. There are too many clients and too many opportunities, right? To your point, but it is really, really tricky to navigate, making sure that there is not just a transition from an operating procedure perspective, but from a relationship perspective too. And I think that it's taken for granted more often than it should be.
Yeah, sure.
It's funny, like Deloitte was full of bait and switches. Like you'd have this big meeting with the partner and the director and the senior consultant would be there. And like within about 2 weeks, the partner and director would have left the project almost completely, and it'd just be like a senior consultant running it or something. But I guess they'd been there at the beginning and they'd been trained what to say, so they'd been onboarded already. So there'd been that discussion. But there's nothing worse than trying to get someone that doesn't know how to talk to suddenly start running everything.
Yeah. So then there's the other ones that it's hard to make the promise because we've come across something we didn't expect, right? So we're in some sort of like, we take on a certain amount of risk for our clients. That's why they've hired us. That's why these failure points become very big deals, because they pass the risk on to you. You're supposed to reduce the risk. You're supposed to meet the need. That's why you're getting paid the big dollars. But so you take a risk, a technical problem or creative problem, and you're at an end point or a pivot point that you can't get past. It's really important that moment to be transparent. Listen, if you're going to lose the client anyway, you might as well have a lot of integrity in that moment and just step up to and start explaining what the process is. I know with some creative projects, some of the bigger ones I've been around, where it's been very difficult to make a delivery, to be transparent, to give them at least a heads up, if not to help them try to find a plan B while you're still trying to solve the problem. At some points, we still ended up delivering and did just fine, but that transparency right away didn't just cover our butt, but also created like a trust layer that they knew they were partners with us in that process. It's really important to bring that forward. It's also important to recognize like that's why there's a cancellation clause in your contract. Hey, we're not going to get there. We should stop. We should just simply be ready to say this. We're at the end of what we can contribute. There's still money left in this budget. If we stop working on it, you can take our work product, we can give it to you, and you can take it and finish it somewhere else. That's a really important recognition of like, hey, that limit, as rare as it is, if you cross it and you don't give that moment of decision to the client, yeah, you're so gone. There's no ability to ever come back and reconcile with you again if you can't deliver.
And in my experience, that sort of like that hesitancy to speak up or to be proactive around problems you identify is grounded in something I heard Blair Enns say, which I think is extremely valuable. He was talking about sales situations, but it applies in all of these expertise delivery situations. Said in every essentially negotiation or exchange of services, only one party can be the prize to be won. And as creative service providers, we assume it's the client. They have the money. We want the money. The truth is, whether it's in sales or as we're trying to deliver the product, we have way more options to get revenue than they have options for finding the expertise to get a project over the hump. So if something goes wrong, whether it's our fault or their fault, we are the prize to be won. It's in our interest to be proactive about where we think the problem is and where we think the solution is, because they're not going to go anywhere. Where else are they going to go to finish a project that they under budgeted for, right? But we are so afraid, oh, we took this project on and now there's going to be an overage, things like that. We're going to try and figure it out ourselves and not be transparent. That's the worst place I see agencies and studios miss all the time.
Mm. And I think like risk averse people respect process. Like they love it. They eat that up for breakfast. And I always fought against it. I was like, I'm a creative. I don't have a process. Ideas just fly out of me. But if you can actually say, here are the points with no return and here's where we sign things off, that's a great place to have a conversation and to show where you need to really pay attention.
Yeah, your process is a great reset button. You just say, wait a second, hold on. This doesn't work. Let's hit the reset button. Let's go back to process. Let's talk about what we did, how we're going to get there, how we talked about the process with you, my client, from the very beginning. Why, when we hit this one pivot point, and what seemed to went off the rails is when we went away from our process. If we can come back to that, we can still finish. I worked with a very large design agency out of New York. I'm going to say 10 years ago. It was one of my earlier clients. And they had, back then, New York design clients meant you're basically doing broadcast repackages. So you were relaunching CNN's rebrand or, AT&T's, not AT&T, ABC's latest package or whatever. And they got down a pathway where there was an expectation of something that was being made CG, but was going to look realistic. And 10 years ago, it wasn't ever going to be. But the client just couldn't get out of their own head. So to be able to hit that reset button to process and said, wait a second, what's the real problem we're trying to solve? What's the purpose of branding and what branding needs to solve, that we can get out of what was hanging up everyone and get to actually something that would deliver super successful package after that point. But to just keep trying to meet like some little expectation that somebody couldn't get out of their head and keep working it until the technology was dead. Like, no, that's not what we signed up for anyway. We were doing a rebrand. So I think that there is something of like, if you trust and your process, you hit that reset button, go back to it, you can sometimes recover from that almost immediate failure of not delivering, for sure.
Meg's got a question like that. I'm not sure if you read that in the chat, Joe, but Meg asks if you could talk more about the price we won.
Yeah, and I think hitting that reset button actually, Tim, is a great way to kind of frame that question, Meg, which is like, we don't have to step back and say, you know what, we're not doing this project with you. It's really more about, for me, when we think about being the prize to be won, somebody's got to say the quiet part out loud. The conditions under which we entered this engagement have changed. We don't have to point fingers, whether it's your fault or my fault or whatever. Although oftentimes clients change on us, right? We get in there and then things happen. If we are trying to scramble to prove that we can do the work, they don't know that they are, to whatever degree, 0%, 50%, 100%, accountable for the change in conditions. And so I would much rather raise my hand and say the conditions have changed. I no longer feel I can deliver 100% as promised under the current conditions. Can we please talk about it? As opposed to delivering the best I can with my team, kind of burning the midnight oil behind the scenes and saying, here's this thing that to the best of our ability resembles the thing we were talking about. And clients over here are like, well, the conditions have changed. I don't want this, or this doesn't feel right anymore. One of those is always better than the other, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, very smart. Yeah. And delivering something that's 80% of what the current expectations are, even that might have been 100% of the expectations when you got started, you'll always fail. So that reset or that reconditioning them to make that new expectations is important.
And when we know there's that mismatch, then there's the thing where like, well, maybe we'll give them these other extra deliverables they didn't ask for or didn't pay for so that they still like us. It's like, no, we can't ever get to that point, right? We're scrambling to make sure they still like us.
Yeah. That last one is insatiable. I'll keep on making up for it. I'll keep on making up for it. You'll never pay back that debt.
Never.
Yeah. You said this term proactive, Joe, and that's the third one that I was thinking of. That reason you're going to get fired is it's that you're never proactive. Your agency or your studio just is never proactive in explaining what's going on, giving me an update on where we are in the status of something, asking me for something in enough time I can give it to you, getting clearance on clips or clearance on other people's IP as part of the process. If it's always reactionary, or if I, as your client, always has to ask you for it instead of you telling me it's happening, it's like walking upstream. It's just so much resistance working with you. You might have had all the creative ability that you needed to, but it's just not worth the effort because it's just so much effort. So that proactive nature and not being proactive is just going to cancel you right away with that client.
Yeah, it's called customer service for a reason.
Yeah. The elements there are sometimes you have to create that report and have a routine as part of your report. So you as a business owner, you might need to be the one pushing your team. If that team doesn't have that effort or that ability to do it, you might be the one internally having to push it forward. But to ignore it, to not let it happen, you can create a lot of animosity with you and your client.
I've got a real strong opinion about this one too. But I feel like really clearly a client hires a creative service firm because they don't have that capacity for creativity. Otherwise, they wouldn't bother. So if you feel like you're delivering the status quo, everything's good, right? We ran through our weekly meeting with the client and all the boxes are checked. You think you are doing exactly what you're supposed to, and the client is wondering, where's that creativity that I paid for because I can't have it myself? So if you're not proactively demonstrating your expertise, it doesn't mean giving away free thinking, but it does mean demonstrating the reasons that they've hired you. Even if you feel like everything's smooth sailing, they are slowly getting closer and closer to firing you because you've forgotten to deliver the thing they can't have internally.
Yeah. And that might even be, there's like a soft fire and a hard fire. Like soft fire means I'll just never talk to you again. Hard fire is like, no, I am, you don't get it. I'm taking this project from you. Sometimes you can create such animosity by just having that client feel like they've worn themselves out. They just simply say to you, listen, I just can't work with you anymore. I'm taking this from you. It's one of the reasons why when we do our production roll-up meeting, right, the weekly production meeting, we ask the three questions. The three R's. How are we doing with this client when it comes to, I'm sorry, the three C's, creatively, are we meeting the creative needs and the creative desires that we expected and they expected from the very beginning? How are we doing on it with our understanding of the cash? Are we making that, that ability to kind of like make the money that we want to along the way? And then how are we doing that with the relationship? Are these the relationships that we want to have with the client? Are they nice to us? Are we nice to them? And so on. So to be able to put those things together on a weekly basis and then have you as a business owner or manager knowing how each project is doing with those 3 points, we really need to kind of like dive into that and know. Sometimes in that meeting, you'll say, hey, let's table the big picture conversation for a secondary meeting, right? Because it's going off the rails. The creative isn't what we wanted to, or relationship is having this issue. But that weekly check-in to understand and get that feedback. It's also a good reason why you have your business development people or EPs in that meeting representing the client to give you, I heard this about this conversation, about this project. Are we okay? Is there something else we need to? We need all those warning signs to come up and bubble up at some point so we can address them. How are we doing that? Doug's raised his hand. Doug, you want to have a question for us?
Yeah, I just have a quick thing, a reaction to what Joe said and what you just said. Both the, I think what Joe talked about in making, if you're having an issue with your client and you want to talk honestly about it, it takes a lot of courage. And I've had situations as a client where the agency that I was working with, sort of sandbagged me. I didn't realize that there were issues going on. I probably should have been more sensitive. But on the other hand, I think it could be really incumbent upon the agency side to say, hey, things aren't really going as well as we expect, and to admit that takes courage and humility. And I just admire that quite a bit.
Yeah. So you're saying is back in the days when you were a client, you really loved it when there was a trust in relationship between the two parties that you can be transparent.
Yeah. No, you can't put a price on that. And, for somebody to say, Joe, like, hey, it's not really going the way we want it. The soft fire, I've been involved in the soft fire where you stop returning calls, like you get ghosted a little bit, or, you're a little passive aggressive, instead of being honest, instead of saying, hey, this really isn't going the way we wanted to go, or my boss isn't happy, looking for that spark that we thought you were the right one. And then reset conversation really like, oh, I had no idea, because we weren't, you have to take responsibility as a client as well and say, hey, this really isn't going as well as we expected, or we're looking for something else. And not that we want to, we know we're working hard and this is in the brief and so forth and so on. But the ability to open that conversation up takes a lot of courage, and to be humble enough to know maybe you just outwardly everything looks okay, but inward it could be better. And I just wanted to say I think I admire Joe's honesty.
Yeah, that's really great.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Doug, and I love the use of the word courage. I have met, I don't know, hundreds or thousands of creative entrepreneurs, right? There's no business owner in our field who doesn't say, me and my team do great relationship management, right? We're trustworthy. We build great relationships with our clients, blah, 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 blah. But a very, very small percentage of them have the courage to say out loud the thing is going wrong. And so those two things, to your point, Doug, are inextricably intertwined. And the more we realize that, the more we can get in front of the soft fire, which is, of course, the worst feeling ever.
Yeah.
And you get better work at the end of the day, like you always will get better work, and your relationship will be stronger down the line if you have another project for that. You'll remember that. At least I did. I would remember, like, oh, they didn't just put it out there for me. They didn't just lay it all out on the line. They were, true partners. And like I said, it's priceless, as it were.
Yeah. Thanks, Doug. Yeah. I think there's a part of it of like the don't give up mentality. I worked with back in the days when I was producing, we actually did get fired from a project. And it was someday I'll tell you the actual title, but it was a really, really important title sequence. And that was really great. And we're having a good time. And we couldn't wait to deliver it. And the client just was not happy. We could not get what we thought we were trying to do creatively was not going to satisfy their need. So they gave us very direct feedback and they fired us. But this one business owner And all of his smarts said, you know what? I know we're right though. I know our creative direction is there. We're just not showing we're just not far enough along to gain their trust. So even though we got replaced and they started working within our agency, we kept working on that project. And about 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks later, we called the client and said, hey, by the way, we finished it. Do you want to see what we did? And we got a screening with them. We showed them the work and they loved it. And they put our title sequence on the film. They became one of our best clients. Just because the moment of like, hey, we might have failed in the moment, but to persevere, to not lose the integrity, to understand what you were up against, and to know that, in that case, he knew he was right. And maybe we had a point of failure, but we can get past it. And to have the courage to step in that moment is sometimes like where the really big wins can be. I'll have to tell you one day. These are big names. I can't drop big names on a weekly.
You used it now. I'm currently texting you on the side because I want to know what the title is.
Well, there's a lot of Hollywood professionals that can be jerks in the moment, and then they feel a little ashamed at being a jerk too. So sometimes they're in a very reactionary moment. And I have a feeling that some of the read in this room was like, this person's just not right. I know we're right. So even though we got fired, we're not going to accept it. We're going to keep on working on it. And I think there's probably a reality of like all the personality types that are out there. Sometimes as a leader, that's just not us. We're not going to be the one that can confront a client, where it's not who we can step up and be. That's what we have to recognize where our weakness is and why we need other people in our team to have that strength, to rely on them and be honest and say, hey, if I might be the owner, but I need you to be the one carrying this torch and have this honest conversation and open the door. I'll be there. I'll back you up in every way. And other times I've seen owners kind of sweep in and say, the big apology comes from them. It's my fault. Even though they weren't on the project directly, my fault. It's my company. I'll take care of it. What do we need to fix it, and be able to break it into the pieces and put it back together again. So I've seen it from both sides, but I think who you are and personality wise, you have to kind of judge that and put the right people around you to make this possible as well. I left you guys speechless.
I do think that's incumbent on.
Oh, it's a beautiful moment.
Whatever. Sorry, Joe.
No, it's okay. I think that sentiment is right on, Tim, and it's incumbent on the owner in some cases, but also on the team, on the project internally. If our internal communication about how this is going is not clear enough, right? If we're not clear what the client needs and who the right person on our team is to deliver it, then we're also delaying the inevitable, right? We're just avoiding the part where they say that this isn't working. And so I just, the internal communication that sets us up to not get fired, I think is equally as important.
Yeah. So let's just say this, like, the reason people get fired, it's not at random, right? And it's, as much as we want to believe, it's not always our client's fault, right? Maybe it's rarely their fault. Maybe recognizing that client was a good fit for us to begin with might have been some discernment to never have started the project. But as soon as you commit and make a promise, those promises need to be met, those expectations need to be there, and those relationships need to be secure. And that's a big piece of what you're delivering. So many creative people are afraid of delivering the wrong creative, and they're actually failing in these other 3 areas. The reason you're being fired isn't because you weren't the greatest creative company. We can see that from the outside. It's who you are and how we work with you all along the project. Those are really the big reasons we get pulled off of projects and lose clients.
Odds are excellent your creative's pretty good, right? If you won the job in the first place.
Yeah, if you won in the first place, exactly. Hey, does anyone else have any questions? I'd be happy to kind of turn off the spotlights and turn this into mastermind.
I just want to say to Dallas that I love 20,000 Hertz, and that if that's where you produced the show, now I can imagine it in my mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you. I have no idea who said that because you didn't pop up on my screen, but I appreciate it.
Oh, it's me.
Yeah. I'm literally like checking our stats today. We dropped 2 episodes simultaneously about cats and then about dogs.
Love the episode. Not that I want to show I'm a fanboy, but I love the episode where you dissected sounds of appliances, different appliances of different pitches and tones. I love that episode.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
you.
I mean, my laundry machine is right outside my office. It's like, oh, that's an interesting little. After I listened to that episode, it's like, oh, that was an interesting little 3-note beep.
Yeah, if you guys don't know, Dallas has a podcast that's very well listened to called 20,000 Hertz.
Oh, yeah.
And what is kind of fun is that when you listen to the podcast and then you listen to him on Zoom, he sounds the same way. So you feel like you're like the real version of Dallas is happening right here in your ears. So
I talk a lot faster here. I noticed. So I'm like, I gotta get through it as fast as possible.
Anyway, thank you for the show.
Yeah,
thank you.
And for your work. You're welcome.
I think we're gonna lose Matt here in a second. He has to jump over to a mighty nice meeting, right, Matt?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I gotta go. But happy Thanksgiving, my fellow Americans.
Thank you,
Even
Matt.
I'm not technically American. Yeah, I'm with you.
Thanks, man. We'll see you later.
Awesome, Matt. And I hope this was very helpful to all you. I don't know if anyone has any stories or other questions to ask or experiences that they had, but we know that you're up against a lot when it comes to accepting a project and then delivering it. There's just so many variables from that A to B moment. And I think that being fired is such a big fear from the beginning all the way through, especially when it comes to delegating to others and so on. So just to recognize like really where the rubber hits the road is in this understanding and being a lot of transparency between your client, meeting their expectations, and then obviously being proactive about every step along the way. You're going to solve 98% of all the problems you have by just doing those simple things as you go along. There's no reason to, and then like let the creative part be the creative part, have its own kind of creative struggles, but that's what we all love about this industry is the creative struggle. Any last words, Joe?
Can I ask you a question, Jim? What do you mean by struggle?
The creative struggle?
Yeah,
I almost feel like, if you think about it for real, you're making a promise that I will get this creative out of my mind before we deliver, I promise, right? And in reality, it's a very subjective nature. Like what we're delivering is super subjective. The actual deliverable is pixels, but pixels don't come from anywhere besides people's minds. And there's a lot of process and talent and elements to making creative decisions to get there. So if I had to deliver to you a ton of coal, 1 ton of coal, and I have it in my backyard, I know I just have to lift it, put it in a truck, and deliver to your house. It was a known entity ahead of time. But in the creative process, it's keyframes we start with, and then we struggle in a fun way, in a beautiful way, to get that thing out of my mind, out of our hearts, and then into those pixels. So that's what I meant by that.
Yeah, that makes sense and very familiar,
yeah.
Except for the cold part.
Yeah. If we only had to deliver something that was already physically present and we were just the logistics part of it, it'd be great. But I think a lot of our method process, and honestly why we love this industry, is because it's so open-ended and so much possibility, and we want to tap into that possibility as much as possible and be appreciated for when we do it. That's where the reward comes from. Yeah, good question. Well, that's great. Thank you all for being part of this conversation. I hope this is helpful to you. Again, we're not going to be here next week because we Americans have our Thanksgiving holiday starting. We'll be back in 2 weeks for just a couple more episodes before Christmas and New Year's hit. So we'll probably do an end of year wrap up in the next, probably the next conversation or the one after that. Do end of year wrap up, tell you what we see, give you some big picture trends. I'm having some really amazing conversations. I'm having 2 back-to-back meetings this week. One is a follow-up from the work I did at Digital Design Days, and we're getting together once with that small group, talking about what it takes to move forward, the influences and leadership that's needed to kind of move the industry forward. So big picture thinking. And the other is I'm diving into what this digital marketing bubble that's burst, that very few people are wrapping their head around. And I'm doing more and more research of what it really means to be part of that economy, and then what the new responsibilities are going to look like. So I'm trying to, in that case, just learn a lot on your behalf and then put the pieces together. it seems to be a fast moving train, though. Many of us are kind of like up against this thing, and we're feeling this up and down of the economy right now because of it. So those are probably two big takeaways I'll be able to wrap up in the next few weeks when we get there. And I had to say hi to Steve Mink because I haven't seen him for a year and a half. The Harris campaign is over, and now you're back to being seen again. Is that what it is, Steve?
Oh God, yeah. I feel like I've crawled out of a hole.
Yeah.
It's just we're all catching our breaths. Unfortunate, didn't end the way we wanted it to, but you know.
But it was a
we definitely should catch up. I have lots to talk about.
Yeah. I mean, you did 2 presidential campaigns in the last 12 months. You got to say, like, that was an unusual year.
Yeah. I mean, we did over 500 ads. I mean, they didn't necessarily go to air. In fact, most of them did not. That was part of the problem. They spent a lot of money.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
All right. You and I got to catch up.
That's another day.
I see you wrapped up in a heating pad. I'm thinking, did they beat you up?
Yeah, I have a stiff neck. Yeah.
Good to see you all.
You want to watch that? Anyway, we should catch up.
I'd love to. That's great.
All right.
All right, you all. Good to see you. And I think I owe you a conversation too, but we'll catch you guys all next few weeks. Happy Thanksgiving to you who are enjoying the holiday, and the rest of you. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Joe. Goodbye.